Hello and welcome back to the Unofficial Gilded Age Aftershow. We are talking all things HBO's The Gilded Age, and we have a big episode for everybody today. I am so excited to be here. I am your host. My name is Kelsie Paul. I am the Interim Director of Learning and Visitor Experience at the Frick Pittsburgh. Today, I am joined by two of my favorite colleagues. We have Dawn Breen, who is our Chief Curator and Director of Collections here at the Frick, and a new face to our after-show audience, Lauryn Smith, who is our Assistant Curator here at the Frick Pittsburgh. A perfect ensemble to talk about this episode, I think. So I will start off with a very quick synopsis, which is we are watching Season 3, Episode 4, Marriage is a Gamble. Bertha deals with unwanted rumors in the press and the unexpected arrival of her sister, Monica. Meanwhile, Ada explores an unorthodox way to manage her grief. Jack makes a deal, and Gladys's wedding to the Duke reaches the point of no return. And that is where we're going to start. We have to start with the biggest plot point of the episode, which is, of course, the run-up and then the eventual wedding of Gladys and the Duke. We pick up an unspecified amount of time later. But we got a really great question from a viewer that is a nice place for us to start. We heard from viewer Katie Marie, who asked, how long were engagements during this period? Was there a rush to the altar once a financial contract was drawn up? So Dawn, do you want to start us there? It's not super clear how long this engagement has been, but we get the sense that it's quick, and that's not necessarily always the case in the Gilded Age.
No, I think a typical engagement could have lasted anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. And it really depended upon a couple's circumstances and their age. Younger working class couples probably had to save up money for marriage or a new house. So their engagements might have lasted much longer. For example, we don't know when Henry and Adelaide Frick meet, but their courtship has begun by the spring of 1881, and then they are married in December of that year. So their engagement is less than a year, which seems to make sense given Frick didn't have to save any money. But I get the impression that Gladys's engagement has absolutely not been a year or even a month. Probably so Gladys can't change her mind. I think Bertha has a sense of urgency to get this finished and tied up.
Yeah, got to sign on the dotted line, right? And make sure that there's no backing out. I have heard that Consuelo Vanderbilt, again, we're going to keep making those comparisons. I mean, her engagement to the Duke of Marlborough was very quick, like 6 weeks, like a very quick turnaround for a wedding as lavish as what we see in the show. That's not a lot of time to plan like the wedding of the century, as Bertha puts it. There's also a lot of conversation about bridesmaids. There's some discussion about Marion being a bridesmaid, and some interesting sort of correlation between, I think, like our modern expectation of what a bridesmaid does and what we see then. So Dawn, walk us through a little bit about like what a typical role of a bridesmaid is in this era and how that maybe is similar or different to what we see now.
Yeah, I think bridesmaids, traditionally, a lot of their duties were to the wedding day and not so much that like build up. There's no bachelorette party really happening. Bridesmaids are typically the younger, unmarried women and family members or close friends. For example, we know that Henry and Adelaide had 2 bridesmaids. One was Adelaide's sister, Addie, and Henry's cousin, Mariah Overholt. And then they had 2 groomsmen, who was a friend of Henry's, and then Adelaide's brother, Howard. So you get a sense of the social circles more, because there's a much broader look at bridesmaids for Gladys's wedding.
And I had read that it's pretty typical in this era for bridesmaids to wear white. There's an innocence kind of purity thing happening there. So we get to see, Marion in her white bridesmaid's dress. I do want to talk like really briefly about her coming down and showing everyone the dress, because it's a great scene.
I was going to say not innocent at all. There was a very raunchy conversation about it.
The turnaround and the little bit of the bustle bump is my favorite part. But a gorgeous dress, which I think, is the only thing that we would expect. There's also a line in the show where Bertha talks about doing this the English way. So Dawn, what does that mean? Like, what is the English way versus the American way when it comes to a wedding like this?
Yeah, so the English way, English brides traditionally walk down the aisle first alongside their father, and then they are followed by their bridesmaids, which is how we see Gladys proceed down the aisle with her dad. And then she has her 6 bridesmaids carrying that 10-foot long, heavy train.
Yeah. Yeah. There's some practicality to that, right? Like it's just like you need somebody to help you get down the aisle in that way. And we also get like a little bit of a name drop situation from Bertha where she is talking about who these bridesmaids are. We learn that part of the reason why there is potentially a spot for Marion is because one of these bridesmaids, Leonie Jerome, is ill and is not going to be able to attend. Lauryn, give us a little bit of like a rundown of who these ladies were, particularly Leonie, because she was a real person.
Yeah, like we've, I think, talked about a lot on this podcast over the 3 seasons is that the writers are so creative when it comes to taking real historical people and either inserting them in ways that we may or may not agree with the storylines, but also drawing really heavily from Gilded Age personas. And kind of creating their own fictive characters. So you've already kind of mentioned Leonie is absolutely a real person. Her father was known as the King of Wall Street, and her sister Jenny is a dollar princess and becomes the mother of Winston Churchill. And when I was digging a little bit more into this, since we were talking about engagements, according to the biographer William Manchester, Jenny and her husband, Lord Randolph Churchill, were only engaged 3 days after meeting, but that the wedding was postponed because a financial agreement wasn't reached. And it was quite contentious, apparently. And if we're following, you'd mentioned unmarried women, kind of the timeline of season 1's 1882, and this is 1884. Leonie goes on to marry Sir John Leslie in 1884 in New York. So maybe not unmarried for much longer after this moment. And then we have Carrie Astor, who is a known entity on the show, the daughter of Caroline Astor. And then 2 seemingly fictitious women, Mary Drexel and Isabel Winthrop, but those names, Drexels and Winthrop, obviously are going to kind of set those alarms for those who've looked into the Gilded Age, the Drexels being big banking family starting out in Philadelphia, so very old money. And then the Winthrops being this prominent New York family that dates back to the colonial period and known for all their involvement in law, finance, and society and being a part of the 400. So just those little Easter eggs. I feel like they want us all to be Googling whenever a new character arrives to be like, were you real?
Which is they got me because that's what I do while I'm sitting there watching for sure. And I think like it's worth pointing out that like when we're talking about, at least at this level of society in the Gilded Age, like these are not just your best friends, right? Like that, I think like modern times, like you pick people you're close with, you pick your best friends, your close family, but like there's a little bit of a status thing here as well. Bertha alludes to that, the fact that like Marion's not really like on par with these other ladies, which is why Bertha kind of pushes back against it at first. But then there's also that implication that by being part of this wedding, it's going to add a little bit of social cachet for Marion, which potentially makes her a little bit more suitable of a possibility for Larry, which is very exciting. But let's talk about the dress, Gladys's dress. There's a lot of conversation about it. We get a line from Bertha that they have chosen not to go with the House of Worth for her designer, which is an interesting choice. And instead, she has gone with an American designer who she refers to as Madame Donovan. We've talked about Worth on the show before. We've seen gowns that Bertha has worn that are, based on actual Worth designs. But Dawn, remind us a little bit about what the significance of the House of Worth is, but also who Madame Donovan is in sort of the fashion of the era.
Yeah, so Worth is one of the most significant fashion designers of the era. He is kind of self-fashioned as the father of haute couture, and his fashions were absolutely all the rage. He was a Britishman who set up shop in Paris, so he had clients on both sides of the ocean. And as you mentioned, we heard his name in season 1, so we know how much he is prized by Bertha. But Madame Donovan is another one of those figures who is a real person, and I was really excited that she she got a name drop. She is an Irish-American dressmaker who studied in Paris. She was heavily influenced by French couturiers, and she had her own showroom in New York, and it would eventually move up to Madison Avenue, kind of around the scene of our story in the 1890s, I think. And her shop actually sold designs by Worth and Pinget. She was licensed to sell designs from some of these Parisian couturiers, so that made it a little bit easier for an American clientele to have access to the super high fashion. And her client list included the Goulets, the Astors, the Vanderbilts, all of the familiar names that we know. After her death in 1906, the New York Times described her as the pioneer dressmaker of the 400, referring to that group of the most elite New Yorkers. And she is the fashion designer purportedly behind Consuelo Vanderbilt's gown worn at her wedding to the Duke, which of course is a decade later than our scene is. So it looks very different than Gladys's wedding dress. And I think the fashion team and the costume designers of the Gilded Age did a tremendous job kind of staying true to the 1884 silhouette, but also like making sure they were delivering on the television drama that everybody was looking for. And I think a fun little fact about Madame Donovan, she's not without her touch of scandal. I think at least once her employees' luggage was seized at U.S. Customs on the suspicion of smuggling. And this was common practice for a lot of fashion designers. You would often rip out your Parisian couturier's label so that you might not have to pay the customs duties, the high taxes, when you came back into the country. So often seized goods would have been sold publicly at auction. And in 1893, there was an auction of Worth, Pinget, and other gowns that had been seized from Madame Donovan that apparently was mobbed by, 500 shoppers. But I find that so interesting because she did also obtain the license to legally replicate a lot of the designs as well. But I guess perhaps some of her employees got a little greedy with that.
Right, or she's an enterprising businesswoman, right? Like she's trying to do this, she's trying to make as much money as she can. Well, I don't know, but I love that. And I feel like that's appropriate because of course, Bertha's going to go with somebody with a little bit of a touch of pizzazz, right? I think she's not going to go with the sort of expected choice or whatever. She's trying to make headlines. I think that makes sense for Bertha.
She wasn't concerned about Sargent and his Madame X scandal.
Yeah. It all tracks. So of course, this all leads up to the big wedding. There's a lot of, is she going to go through with it? Is she not going to go through it? A lot of suspense built into this real spectacle, which again is very much on par with what was reported at the time about the Vanderbilt Marble wedding. Huge crowds. We don't see them in the show, but there's this allusion to the fact that the traffic is insane and there's all of these crowds sort of waiting, just hoping to get a glimpse of Gladys as she gets out of the carriage. And of course, one of my honestly favorite parts of the episode was that time that we got to spend inside the church while they're waiting for Gladys to show up. And because it's kind of not super common for us to see all of these different characters in one place. And I think one of my favorite parts was watching Caroline Astor just start to crack a little bit, more and more as things go on, because of course we find out right before this wedding that, press has gotten a hold of this story with Charlotte Astor Drayton, that she's been, got a lover on the side, and there's been this duel potentially between her husband and her lover. And it's been in the press and everybody kind of knows about it. And so you see Caroline Astor just slowly get more and more paranoid, but also kind of more and more agitated about the gossip around this. And we get this incredible moment where Ada just flat out is like, oh, were we supposed to ask you about something in the paper? And it's the first thing that really ruffles Caroline. And so I'm going to take a poll with you two. We'll start with Dawn. Do you think that was purposeful on Ada's part, or was that just sort of a slip of the tongue accident?
I feel like we've never seen Ada be that intentionally malicious, so I can't believe that she meant to say that. But I feel like I also have never seen her just be so out of touch or kind of daft. I don't know. She said that and I was like, hiding behind my hands because they're like, my goodness, what is wrong with you?
All right, Lauryn, same question.
Oh man, I get such bad secondhand embarrassment when characters do things like that, and I'm just like, no. But I don't know. There really is this moment, like we can see both Ada and Agnes going through these transitions. We're having these softer moments of Agnes with Marion being like, well, you don't usually talk with me about it, but like they have this kind of sweet girls chat. Tell me about the dress. Talk about Larry and your interests. And then Ada is getting a little more ruthless. There's the whole scene with the like, let me see the bill. Can I I see the cattiness coming out with her sister. So part of me is like, oh, are we going to see how money and power and being the one in charge for once is going to maybe turn her into this bit of ruthless, because she is now more active in society in a way that her sister had been. And that's been, one of the great laments. Agnes comes home, I feel like every episode, and is like, another club that I'm not a member of anymore because you pay the bill. So I can't go to the armory. I'll be curious to see where they go. But this, I think we talked about, was an episode where we were just constantly like, Ada, what you doing, girl? Like, what's going on?
Yes, and we're going to talk about what's going on in a few minutes, so hold on to that thought. I don't know. I honestly, I feel like it's left sort of intentionally vague for us to kind of come to our own sort of thoughts on what Ada was doing there. It's like on one hand, I could see it just sort of be a slip of the tongue, like her not thinking about it. But I'm with you, Lauryn. Like, I think we're starting to see Ada come into her own a little bit. Like she's kind of not shying away from some of these interactions that she maybe wouldn't have been involved in before. So I don't know. And it comes right on the tails of about a comment about Marion. So I almost was like, is that partially like a little bit of a defense of Marion in some way? Like, I don't know. So I don't know, but I'm really liking where Ada is, because it's just unexpected in a way that it hasn't been in the last couple of seasons. So it's very fun. So of course, everything eventually does come to this point of no return moment. We have some really heartbreaking scenes between Gladys and George. And, of course, at the end, she does go through with it. She says, I do. And we have this final ending scene, to move forward a little bit, where she's basically sailing away on this steamship with this guy who she barely knows, away from this life. There's a kind of like haunting image at the end, out the porthole of the Brooklyn Bridge, and you get this kind of sense that she's kind of sailing into the unknown. And I think like it's such a poignant reminder of the fact that like she is essentially a child. Like she's a teenager. She's maybe 19, like at its oldest. And so like, for all of the beauty and the, excitement around a wedding like this, like it is really a sad storyline. Like it's a sad episode in a lot of ways. And so, I think we'll see what the ramifications for that is for Gladys. But also I'm just gonna say blech for the last. Dawn also just gives like a blech. Like it's just like whatever, the reality of a marriage in the 19th century, but it never gets any less cringy to watch that sort of thing at the end with her and the Duke. So poor Gladys.
Yeah, that like abject terror on her face, walking down the aisle, the tears, and then that final scene is just like, she is powerless.
Yeah, and it's sort of a thing that I think she's like resigned herself to, but also maybe never really thought what it was actually going to be like when it got to that moment. And so when you realize that she becomes resigned to it, it's so sad to watch. And of course, we'll see how this plays out for her in this sort of new phase of her life. She's going to be a married woman away from her mother for the first time. And that I think will be really interesting to kind of see how she kind of comes into her own potentially, because she maybe has to out of necessity. And speaking of potentially strong-willed ladies, let's segue to one of our favorite new character debuts, which is the arrival of Bertha's sister, Monica. Monica O'Brien bursts onto the scene, played by the wonderful Merritt Wever, which was such an incredible casting choice. Lauryn, I think it is fair to say that absolutely no one ruffles Bertha's feathers quite like her sister, Monica. And I think it kind of further cements for us that Bertha does not come from the world that she is living in now. And we get some peeks of that through the way that she interacts with Monica.
Oh, absolutely. And can I just say, whoever does the casting for this show, just 11 out of 10. Phenomenal choices. And especially, she didn't have a ton of dialogue, but the impact that Merritt had from the very moment you see her eyebrow kind of quirk in the reception hall. Just she really utilizes the face card the whole time and gives us, I think, a really great approach to understanding how different she is from her sister just by her little quips or the way she says something back. And she's very much self-assured. She doesn't care what anyone thinks, especially her sister. And we see that come up a lot when we have the discussion specifically about the dress, which leads to a bit of drama later at the dinner. She has her one dress after Bertha runs through her, up to 6 potential outfit changes a day. And then leading into this moment of Bertha knows she can't change her mind. So instead, she sets up this whole trap with a wobbly coffee cup, lukewarm coffee, so that she can have a new dress designed for her sister from one of her already pre-approved from her closet outfits. But we do start to get these nuggets. So I'll be curious if Monica gets to stick around a little bit and hang out at the mansion. And if we'll learn more, like you mentioned, O'Brien, and there have kind of been these rumors about Bertha potato farmers from Ireland. There's a name drop of Albany, so maybe being from there. And then we know this is really the only family member that she is letting in contact with her family, but they seem to have a really good relationship. The little quip between her and George, as her brother-in-law, was very cute. Clearly beloved by Larry since he invited her. So I'm very excited to see where this one is going to go. And I really hope they keep her around for a few more episodes at least.
I know. I will be really sad if she's just sort of like a one and done appearance, because she is so much fun to watch. And you get the sense that they are sisters. They both have very strong-willed, sort of determined personalities. You can tell the ways, and it's we get so much, even just these little interactions that they have, the way that only sisters can pick at each other and just sort of annoy each other and get under each other's skin, which is so much fun. But yeah, I think my favorite part is just that Monica could not be less impressed by all of the things that are happening around her. She is not impressed by her sister's house. She is not impressed by the fact that she puts so much effort into changing 6 times a day. And she is equally not impressed that her niece is marrying a duke. She does not care. And one of the most fun things that we get to see is Monica going toe-to-toe with another strong-willed sister, which is the introduction of the Duke's sister, Lady Sarah. And I just am going to say the sister-brother vibes are weird.
You know what? Reddit agrees with you. When I search on the Gilded Age subreddit, there is a lot of that kind of, are we going Game of Thrones? Are we where is this? What is her role with her brother's life? Because she clearly is very domineering. And there might be something in the preview at the end of the episode that lets us know she's going to be around for a while and maybe cause Gladys some strife.
Well, and it's interesting, right? Because we've seen lots of unwed sisters in this show, right? We've seen that relationship with Agnes and Ada for a long time. We're learning that Monica is also unmarried, but obviously Bertha has sort of left her up in Albany, separate from everything. And so once again, we've got this sister who is, she's unmarried. She's living in her brother's house, their family home in England. And there's that great conversation where Monica's so you're moving out, you're going to move out because it's weird. And Sarah's no, I had absolutely zero plans to move out, which is very funny. And then, the coffee incident happens right after that. But, Lauryn, you were saying that, this is going to be a test of Gladys's resolve in some ways. Sarah is an element that we haven't sort of seen yet, but she's going to be, it sounds like, a very big part of Gladys's experience being over there. And you were saying that if having Bertha Russell as your mother hasn't trained you for this very moment, nothing will.
Absolutely. I'm really hopeful we continue to see the defiant streak that we for the past few seasons as she's coming into adulthood. And I'm really curious because we do see those moments in the settlement where her father is really trying to kind of put up those blocks of, okay, the money's going to go to his daughter, not necessarily to the Duke. So I'm curious how that's going to come into play and how much of that we're going to see, since last season there was so much around Pittsburgh and we never really went there. So I'm hoping that we'll get a little bit more England.
Yeah. And we haven't seen Gladys interact with Sarah at all. She's not at the dinner that they have. They don't interact in the wedding in any way. So, it will be interesting to see when they're finally in a scene together, like what that dynamic is like. I cannot imagine it's going to be warm and fuzzy. So that will be very fun. Poor Gladys, she escapes her mother finally and then is replaced by just another terrible woman that she has to deal with. So she can't catch a break. But we're going to cross the street and we're going to talk about the Van Ryn household. Specifically, we see Ada take Mrs. Bauer up on her offer to, be able to connect with Luke again. And as we suspected, she is going down the spiritualism path. And Ada ends up hosting this seance with a Madame Dashkova. So Lauryn, give us a little bit of a rundown of what is going on here with Ada and sort of where this storyline fits into the real story of spiritualism in America.
Yeah, so we've kind of talked about a little bit, that especially on site with grief and around how families mourn, and it can be very public. And around this time in the 19th century, you also see this rise in spiritualism, which is this religious movement that sweeps across US and Europe. And a big proponent of this is claiming that spirits of the dead are able and willing to communicate with the living. So the spiritualism movement continues on into the early 20th century, and prominent individuals such as Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and you mentioned Kelsie Mary Todd Lincoln supported this movement. And seances and the mediums, the person who can actually communicate with the dead, become really integral to the set of belief. And in the scene, first of all, another amazing casting choice with Andrea Martin of My Big Fat Greek Wedding fame. Love it. Just incredible kind of comedic lead-in, very vague, this kind of language where, you had kind of mentioned, Kelsie, that it is just falling into the trap, like, oh, that is my husband, definitely, and feeding her the information she needs to continue. So Agnes is absolutely not having it. And with the choice of actor, I also am a little bit skeptical. I'm curious to see where it goes, since they do exchange cards. So there is the potential that we might see her reemerge. But I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about Mary Todd Lincoln, since she's more in your professional wheelhouse and past experiences as being one of these really famous people associated with spiritualism, and how publicly that was shameful. And something that was used to criticize her.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think, Mary Todd Lincoln's name becomes very strongly linked to the spiritualism movement on a really prominent level, right? Like, she's the first lady at this time that she is dabbling in this, at a time when a lot of other people are, but like not that prominently, right? And so she lends like a little bit of maybe skepticism or credibility to the movement at that time, sort of, around the time of the Civil War. And, she initially dips her toe into spiritualism after the loss of her second son, Willie, which happens in the middle of the Civil War. And so, like a lot of other people that get involved with this movement, like they're looking for an outlet for their grief. They're looking for a means of coping with that. We hear Ada say that to Agnes, right? Like she says, like, we both believe in an afterlife, right? Like that's part of our religious understanding. But Agnes really draws that distinction of the fact that, yes, we believe in an afterlife, but the church and most traditional religions don't sanction or support spiritualism, right? Like it starts to drift into supernatural and paranormal rather than just strictly religious in the 19th century sense. And so the press really globbed onto that with Mary Todd Lincoln, like this idea of her holding seances in the Red Room at the White House. Like this was scandalous behavior. And of course, after Lincoln is assassinated, that just becomes even more part of her sort of public persona. And eventually she gets labeled crazy. Like that's something that you hear sort of associated with Mary Todd Lincoln a lot. And I think it's really only been in the last several decades that scholarship has sort of revisited the way that the public has, judged Mary Todd Lincoln to say, like, maybe it's not crazy. Like, maybe that's just what we call grief. Like, maybe that's just what we, understand to be grief and coping. And it's an interesting correlation too, I think, to the conversation that Mrs. Bruce has with Borden. Like, she tells him that she's got this husband that is, has been committed to an asylum for melancholia. That's depression, without the sort of clinical term attached to it. And so it's an interesting just kind of reminder yet again of what I think the show does well, which is weaving in these larger social things that are happening in the Gilded Age, at a time when, the ways that we talk about mental health, or what we now know as mental health, are just not there. They just don't have an understanding that we do now. And so these people can be judged really harshly. And so, I'm with you, Lauryn. I'm really interested to see where this goes. I do not think this is the end of Madame Dashkova for Ada. And we'll see kind of what lengths that she goes. But Agnes certainly also does have some justified concerns about what this might mean for Ada. There are lots of documented cases of spiritualists taking advantage of grieving people. And so, yeah, we'll see what side of the line Madame Dashkova sort of falls on. But it's a really fun tidbit in the episode, which is otherwise kind of largely heartbreaking, as we have talked about. As a sort of total left turn, we're going to talk about Jack, because we absolutely have to talk about Jack. We have this great scene where we finally see the clock kind of come to a crescendo here, and this incredible scene where Larry and Mr. Weston are like wheeling and dealing, and Jack is just sort of watching this happen, where they're throwing numbers out and it's not really clear what these numbers are until it finally is said out loud that they are going to pay them $600,000 for the clock design and the patent, lock, stock, and barrel. Jack gets half of that. So, Lauryn, I know you have done the calculations for us. What does Jack walk away with in 2025 money?
Okay. According to Measuring Worth, it is roughly $10.1 million. So, like, astronomical.
That's like, we're talking like lottery money. Like, this is not just like, oh, this is a really nice infusion of capital. Like, this is so much money. And for reference, Dawn, like, what is he probably bringing in his normal salary as a footman during this time?
Yeah, I think probably around $30 or $40 a month. So we're talking approximately $400 a year.
So again, and they do this really nice tidbit where they contextualize it for us, where somebody is like, you basically have as much money as Mrs. Forte does now. So first of all, good for you, Ada. Like, that's like, I mean, we knew that she came into some money, but that's a lot of money. And so, yeah, and we get this just incredibly sweet but sad scene in some ways between Jack and Mrs. Bauer at the end, where he kind of lets her know, like, hey, I have this money now and I don't know what to do with it. And she's basically like, do not tell a soul. Like, she's like, don't tell anyone, because like, he can't stay there. Like, he can't stay there. Like, what, I mean, Dawn, like, it's like, one of the staff in Clayton suddenly has as much money as the Fricks. Like, that's like a dynamic that just can't happen.
No, not once that is public knowledge. But like, my heart broke a little bit when he was like, this is the only home I've ever known. Like, that amount of money is going to upend his life in ways that I'm sure we will see in the next couple of episodes.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting commentary on what the Gilded Age in a lot of ways is all about, right? Like, this incredible opportunity to build a fortune out of nothing, essentially, right? Like, he goes from having nothing to having $300,000 in his pocket within like the matter of minutes, right? For this project, for inventing this clock. And so it illustrates how that was possible in the Gilded Age, how you could go from nothing to having these fortunes, but these fortunes can crumble just as quickly as they are made. And we get, a little peek into what that looks like when we have that conversation between JP Morgan and George, right? Like, this idea that, like, in a lot of ways, like, these people, their lives and their investments and their fortunes are tied up in each other, and just one change of the variable can undo all of it. And so, I hope that's not what's going to happen to Jack, but there's also an element of like, he doesn't know how to manage $10 million. Like, he doesn't have any of that support that somebody like Larry, who has grown up in a house like that, theoretically knows how to manage his money. So, yeah, I really hope that he doesn't lose it all. But for now, we can be happy that Jack has had this windfall, and it's a great storyline for him. We have to just really quickly wrap up. We don't get a lot of Peggy in this episode, which is understandable. There's a lot going on, but we always love to see Peggy whenever we can. The two sort of big exciting things are we get to see the poppy dress again. The poppy dress makes a reappearance, which we love. But Don, you were also saying, we get to see her talk, which is great, or at least a little part of her talk. And Don, you were making the point that, like, once again, Peggy sort of serves to help remind us of some of those larger historical contextual things that are happening in the era, because she's talking essentially about the rise of Jim Crow in the South.
Yeah, I love that we get to see her in this professional capacity giving her lecture. And she's talking about Reconstruction. And following the Civil War, there is this brief moment where freedmen and former slaves and Black Americans see a rise in their civil rights. But those gains are so quickly reversed by the rise of the Jim Crow laws, which are enforcing racial segregation and disenfranchisement, on a level that paralleled their status before. And the status and the wealth that Peggy's family has amassed over the last couple of decades, only one generation removed from slavery, this points at how fragile that wealth and status really was, which is something that Erica Armstrong Dunbar, who is the amazing historian and storyteller behind the Scott family storylines, has spoken a lot about, just that idea of the fragility and how quickly that sense of security could go.
Mm-hmm. And something that Mrs. Kirkland in her ivory tower, I guess, seems unconcerned with. Like, she seems, she's not all that impressed by Peggy's, fortitude or her, professional polish or any of these things, and just sort of dismisses it out of hand as like something that women are not supposed to talk about. And, Dawn, you were saying that this is going to be a really interesting thing going forward with any potential relationship between Dr. Kirkland and Peggy. At some point, the mother-in-law of it all is gonna either be the end, or they're gonna have to get past it.
Yeah. Clearly those ideas are so ingrained, and he seems like such a lovely man. He's so supportive. He's so kind. He's standing up, giving her a standing ovation at the end of her talk, which is so sweet. But how deep do the ideas of his mother are they ingrained in him as well? So they wouldn't be doing right by the Gilded Age without exploring this storyline a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. All to be seen. We have a whole other half of a season to go. We have reached the halfway mark, which is very exciting. So we will see what happens on the back half of the season. Thank you so much for watching and being with us for this episode. This was a real fun one. We will be back next week to watch episode 5, A Different World, and we will be joined by a new special guest. So I will not tell you who that is. I will just tease it to say you're going to have to show up on YouTube on Friday and see who it is. So we'll see you then. Thanks for watching.